What's up, everyone? Welcome to today's video. Welcome to the Video Game Fight School channel. Thank you very much for tuning in. Today, I have a discussion video and I have a special guest as well, whom we would be going through some of the topics at hand. And he has a lot of, I would say, a lot of experience in being able to distill a lot of gaming news and does a lot of God's work on Twitter in giving you the highlights of what video games are coming out and so on and so forth. A very cool member of the DC Games community as well, Sway Casanova. So introduce yourself to those who may not know you. Shout out to you and let's hear you.
Alrighty, this is Sway Casanova. You can find me on Twitter at sway_____ Casanova. And basically what I do is I make threads on Twitter on covering various video games, pointing out the Easter eggs, pointing out the performances if I can, and just pointing out the unique things about the game. I also talk about gaming industry news, so definitely give me a follow there, and thank you for having me, VG.
Hey, my pleasure, man. Those of you who may be watching, you can see that I'm scrolling down Sway's screen, and he's a WWE fan, so I'm trying to dig up some of his stories that he's done, but he's just smitten by WWE, but he does report on a lot of video game content. And so if you're seeing WWE, don't think he's just exclusively doing that. No, that's his big passion, but deep down, he is on the money when it comes to gaming news and a lot of the different events happening in video games and giving you very quick snapshots of very detailed information. But what I really like and enjoy about him more than anything is having discussions with him. As much as I like reading a lot of his, snapshots and threads on Twitter, I think he is actually well versed, and I think it's going to be a treat for you guys to kind of hear some of his, opinions today based on what we're talking about. So today we're going to be visiting and revisiting Gotham Knights from the perspective of two DC fans who have followed this game for years, who followed its release, who followed its perception, its coverage, even till date, where there are now, in my opinion, what I call changes in not only the industry, there are changes in the studio, and there's also change or big changes that are now being realized. They've always been there in the hardware industry as to how gamers, perceive the new generation of consoles and how video games are going to be received post all of the reactions that we saw in Gotham Knights. So I'll jump in and I'll kind of start talking a little bit about what the context of all of this is. So most of you by now, you already know, that Gotham Knights was the one game that triggered a very huge conversation surrounding 30 FPS. And this was because a lot of people felt that Gotham Knights, number one, could have achieved better than 30 FPS. But in a sense, they did not necessarily know what the technical limitations were. There was also the part of things that said Gotham Knights did not necessarily appeal to fans and the developers didn't have a solid vision. So we'll dive into the technical side first, and then we'll talk about, say, the development side, and the leadership and all of that stuff. So, Sway, the 30 FPS conversation, from the time Gotham Knights released and when people actually voiced their concerns to now, what has changed in the conversation, and what are your thoughts so far?
From a technological perspective, I don't think that anything has changed. I think that for people who have paid attention to specifically what consoles are capable of, game development, things of that nature, you kind of already knew what was happening. And you can see that kind of being mirrored in Starfield. But I feel like Gotham Knights was the first big IP project that people would pay attention to and kind of have a magnifying glass on. At that time, there was games coming out and games that have came out that were 30 frames per second and nobody bat an eye. I think what happened is that game was, because it was attached to the Batman IP, a lot more people had vested interest in it. And, they're playing the first party games like Horizon Forbidden West. They're enjoying the experience of 60 frames per second on first party titles. And I believe that, they thought that would carry over. I think that was the first, domino of people realizing and kind of slowly but surely getting educated as far as like what is actually happening in the industry and what is actually happening in the system with these games. And it only happens with bigger titles. Notice since Gotham Knights, and even when Gotham Knights was coming out, nobody bat an eye at Plague Tale. Even though that was 30 frames, nobody bat an eye there. And they came out around a similar time. God of War was 60, but that was the next big title. Then you would go on and you wouldn't hear anything really about a game not being 60 frames per second until really some people were talking about Hogwarts Legacy and mentioning performance there, but you didn't really hear anything all the way up until Starfield. And when Starfield, said that they're going to be locked at 30 frames per second, now you're hearing this all stir up again. And
Recently,
as a few people in the, a few of the council warriors have found out, developers have come online and they've been able to dispel some of these misconceptions of 60 frames per second being valuable on these current landscapes of consoles. And so I think honestly now the difference doesn't lie in the technology nor the development. It lies in the knowledge with the community and how much people are starting to understand or come to grips with the fact that these consoles cannot do what they think they can. And a lot of that comes down to, if I ask the regular person on the spot, can you name me 10 games that are 60 frames per second that came out in this generation that are not first party titles, just first party titles? There's a lot of people when I ask that question that is very hard. Nobody can give me 10 back to back because that many, it's hard. And that's why, because it doesn't happen often. But I feel like people finally are starting to open their eyes to the fact that that doesn't happen often.
Interesting. Interesting. So basically what you're saying is that the conversation, nothing changed for those who already knew, but now the conversation is, opening people's eyes because the limitations is no longer, or they're not isolated to one video game. We now see many video games exhibiting the same exact or similar behavior. And even as hardware conversations are going on, we're starting to see people get more and more enlightened. Now, to what you said, I wanted to add that technical angle to things, which is very important in this video, because if you're looking at Starfield and those who are having conversations about, Starfield being at 30 FPS on the Xbox and so on and so forth, I think their claims are all for console points. They are not wanting to look at the technological, limitations, or at least the technological limits that we're at now with the consoles. But there is a video that Digital Foundry recently did, and I'm actually showing it here. You guys can watch it if you want to go check it out. It's called PC Gaming on the Xbox Series X CPU AMD 4800S desktop kit, and they reviewed a Xbox Series X CPU kit, which is pretty much an APU, kind of a box that has the chip of the Xbox Series X. If you actually go to the Digital Foundry's video, you'll see that this is actually the same hardware as the Series X. The difference is when AMD was manufacturing this, these were defective models for the Series X. So they took them, they kind of locked down the memory, the video memory, and then now you can add RAM and you can use it as a full desktop. So basically they reconverted it and then they released it only in China. Digital Foundry got their hands on this, and then they did some testing and slapped the 7900 XTX on this bad boy and tested a bunch of different video games. What's funny is it's very revealing everything that's said here, because you cannot summarize this video. This video is 29 minutes and 30 seconds long. So anybody who cares would have to go back and watch a lot of different things. Talk about A Plague's Tale. They talked about even the Metro games. They talked about Gotham Knights, Microsoft Flight Simulator, all kinds of video games. And I'm sure more testing is going to actually be done using this particular device on the channel. It's not going to be the last time we see it. And I think the biggest conversation is, are people who are actually saying and making fun of Starfield being 30 FPS, are they being honest or being genuine in looking at the available data, or are they constantly fanning the flames of console points or finding anything or framing it as a disadvantage to make it seem like, your console platform is more inferior than mine, rather than actually open up the conversation so that gamers can be educated and know exactly what it is that they're actually paying for or buying. Because as much as these games, because we saw from the Digital Foundry video that you can actually run Gotham Knights at 60 FPS if you had a more powerful GPU, number one, which the Xbox Series X doesn't have, and number two, if at some point you had a much more powerful CPU, which the Xbox Series X already has its locked CPU. So basically, the after the testing, they found out that the game was running anywhere from 51 all the way to 36 FPS because of the way the game is designed and the way the game is built. Everything about the game is just super beefy. So seeing all of that, I wonder if people who are going to invest in a console are now going to be going based on a better expectation rather than going with something that they see as anecdotal. And what I mean by anecdotal is they're looking at, say, one first party game and thinking that that first party game should be the metric by which every other game should play or run. They see a game like Marvel's Spider-Man, or Miles Morales, the remastered Spider-Man on PS5, and they say, well, these are doing 60 FPS. Why aren't our other games doing 60 FPS? I wish they would actually sit down and say the science of gaming is very, very unique to the video game that's being made and how the video game is made. And if they would do that, I think the conversation would pretty much, be a done deal. Like everyone's going to know if I'm paying $500 for a console, I should expect this level of performance because now the consoles have now stepped into the PC realm. Because when they marketed these consoles, they marketed them as going toe to toe with PCs. Am I wrong? I mean, am I making that up? I mean, they probably never said that, but they went with, you can get next gen features, right?
Yep.
And now, so now it's time to actually put up or shut up. And we're seeing that every game is unique. As much as people may even cite Spider-Man, many people may not necessarily realize that the way Spider-Man's open world meshes are done is done in a way that allows for you to be able to get the game to stream much better and much faster, but you have very minimal limitations in terms of, the way your world is detailed compared to, say, a lot of these other games. For the most part, they've been able to use and harness their entire hardware budget, of which they already know, and they're developing and targeting just one platform. So the first party games actually take the limitation into account and build their games to work within the box that they have, if you get what I mean, compared to everybody else who's like, well, we got to build this game across the board. Well, why don't I just build a game where if the CPU says this is where the game stops, I lock it at 30. If the CPU says this is where the game continues, I unlock it to 60 or unlock it to 45 or whatever it may be. So that's the technical side that I think a lot of people kind of ignored. And I'm glad that it's coming into, the conversation because, man, I got heckled, man. We got heckled when Gotham Knights came out. What was your experience like when Gotham Knights came out? I mean, what did you see?
I mean, it was a lot of, being a defender, being delusional, being just like anything that wasn't coming from a place of an educated opinion, right? And the one thing that Gotham Knights made me realize about, I'm gonna say, the fandom of gaming is that there really are three levels, right? And I feel like most people reside in the middle level. So you have the casual audience who doesn't pay attention to any of this, who doesn't know performance unless like something is going horribly wrong and your game is horribly stuttering or crashing, right? They're gonna have those people. They wouldn't know if you got a fluid 30 frames per second or not. Then you got people online who I'll put in the middle who know of these things but don't really know the intricacies about them at all, nor do they care to. They only want to know enough to be able to speak on it, but they don't care to know anything more than that because they're not interested in that. They're just interested in what is going to help strengthen their argument or be able to have a conversation with somebody. And then you have the people, which I would put you in, and myself, which is they're interested in game development. They're interested in technology. They're interested in knowing how it works, knowing the process, and having all the data before, so that way they're more informed with what they're dealing with. And when you have more people residing in the middle, and then you add council warriors on top of that, that's how you get what we got with Gotham Knights. A lot of people kind of just wanting to have their side. Um, Not to mention, even if you take away from performance issues, you got a lot of people that was mad because Batman wasn't playable or he wasn't in there.
Mm.
Um, there was a lot of things going into that game that caused a lot of different things. But once it said that it was 30 frames per second, that became a very, very, very hot topic within the gaming community. And, there was nothing you could say that, anybody would believe, even if you technically broke it down to them from a technological perspective. They would not hear it, and that's because they don't want to hear it. They normally have a line or an opinion that their mind is already made up on, and that is they're not willing to pivot to that. The only thing that they're interested in is what information will strengthen my argument, and that is it. So I don't believe that all the time content creators are interested in, putting the right information out there, more than just putting enough information out there to get to the general audience. But they don't really, not everyone does the work to put in to really get that educated perspective. And I think that that is the mixture of it. You have some that do and some that don't. But it was a mixed bag, to say the least.
Hmm. It was a mixed bag. It was a mixed bag. But to be fair, there was not a lot of information out there, and those who were
Absolutely.
tasked with actually being the ones to put the information out there did not temper their and they didn't temper their,
Expectations.
yes, people didn't temper their expectations, and when they were drawing conclusions, like Digital Foundry, I
Yep.
remember when the guy who did the Gotham Knights technical review, he was very
Mm-hmm.
biased against the game because he liked Arkham. I
Yep.
wish he was much more open to saying, all the answers are not here. So even though this is what we see, we may need to wait for more information down the road, because it's not been a year, and they themselves, Digital Foundry, now have hardware to actually be able to test out the game and remove all of the GPU limitations and test the game on the CPU, even a much more powerful version, actually, because even if it's still the same, the Series X's CPU has one core that's locked, I think, for the operating
Mm-hmm.
system, and the one that they tested does not have that core locked. So even with a much more powerful one, you're even seeing very similar performance. So even then, it also calls into question, all of what the consoles were actually hyped up to be.
Capable of.
But
Mm-hmm.
it is what it is. I'm glad that all of it has come full circle. And knowing this, we can rest assured say that, Starfield needs to be locked at 30 FPS. I know Todd Howard is probably not the most credible guy in the world because of his, interest. And this is us just pivoting. But I think now it makes a whole lot of sense to say, this is probably one area where we can say, Todd, as much as everybody doubts your credibility, in the internet space, you might be onto something here. And the way you guys developed your game, you did not develop your game to run at 60 FPS from day one, from ground up. When you were making those decisions, you were making those decisions with 30 FPS in mind. You were not thinking of 60 FPS. It wasn't even in your purview. So you just kept building and building and building, and you went crazy, which is fine, which is what game development is about ambition and a bit about pushing the envelope. Even if you steal someone else's idea, you still want to push the envelope. Like people keep saying, Starfield is a No Man's Sky, duplicate. So
Yep.
what? Let somebody else come in and do a bigger version of No Man's Sky. Like, which game can you find today that's an original of itself? Like the PlayStation, because I know this is coming from some people in the PlayStation side. God of War took a lot of its inspiration from where? Dark Souls. So
Mm-hmm.
the developers are saying that this is what Santa Monica, their developers, said. So this is not like, oh, someone in another space is just claiming that. No, the developer said, we looked at Dark Souls, we took some inspiration, but we didn't want everything to be like that. But you cannot deny that a big, massive, hunky boss looking at you in 3D space and trying to whack you with a big weapon is not a Dark Souls, theme. I'm not saying that From Software invented it, but they sure did popularize it with almost all their games, right? So
Then it could be said about Breath of the Wild.
Exactly. I was shocked when I saw big bosses in Breath of the Wild. I was like, Breath of the Wild has Dark Soul-esque combat. Like, I was like, what? That's weird. I have it, but I've never beaten it. I bought it for my kids. They can't play it. They keep coming to me like, hey, Dad, you want to help us? I'm like, guys, I don't like this game. I try my best to help them a little bit. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe when you're old enough to understand the game, you can play it. So I just shelved both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. I just shelved it because it's their copy. I mean, I thought maybe I could play it and kind of help them out, but I'm not interested enough. But shout out to Nintendo nonetheless. You think about even the Spider-Man games that are, that are basically now the current Spider-Man games that are the most popular. They took their ideas from the Arkham games, and I'm sure the Arkham games took their ideas from other games as well. So that's the way game development ought to be looked at. And I'm sure that this is something that, will eventually come full circle once a lot of this noise can get dumbed down and so on and so forth. But the second side of the conversation is Gotham Knights. Right now, the future of Warner Brothers Games Montreal in regard to development. Warner Brothers Games Montreal's possible next project, because seems like that ship is right now anyways, there might be kind of a change of command going on, possibly, or at least within the ranks, somebody that they're bringing up to push forward the next title. So give a little context and kind of share what your opinions are so far.
With all of the leadership changes, Patrick Redding is off to Ubisoft, Montreal. Fleur Marty is off to Monolith, and you have Jeff Eleanor off to what seems to be a startup game development company. So we're definitely going to be looking at a different landscape with WB Montreal. The next project is almost completely unpredictable now, because the DNA of what made, let's say, Gotham Knights the direction that they went is no longer there. So the creative direction is going to be different. How they look at game development is going to be different. So it's kind of a gigantic unknown, but at the same time, it's kind of exciting. These things happen all the time, so it's going to breed innovation some way, somehow. But with their working on the next title, and them working on a new game, this is going to breed a different life into WB as a whole. And then with Wonder Woman, I mean, that can only be a good thing that a lot of WB Montreal people are helping out there, because then it has to be getting close to being wrapped up.
I won't be surprised. It was shown in 2019, right?
Yep.
By 2024, it'll be 5 years.
Yeah.
So, I mean, time is flying like crazy. So I guess that's not really far off of an opinion to actually put out there, because, if you think about it, it's a game that a lot of people are looking for. And Warner Bros. Montreal, in my opinion anyways, if I was to actually kind of mention what I would prefer for Warner Bros. Montreal, is I strongly believe that they are a very solid studio, but they're in a, I think Warner Bros. Needs to make a decision with them. A very strong foot to the ground decision with them, and just say, this is the studio that you are going to be within the Warner Brothers ecosystem. Because right now, it just seemed like this was the first game they were able to do after the Arkham Origins game, which was still not even their own original IP. They basically were making a filler game using everything from Rocksteady. So Are they going to be a live service studio? Are they going to be an adventure game studio in the DC universe? Is James Gunn restructuring, everything in gaming? Is he using Warner Brothers Montreal as the number one guinea pig to actually do it, since they're not, they weren't probably advanced into their second project? And I want to take this opportunity to say I'm not really a big fan of James Gunn, honestly. I'm not. I don't know why. He hasn't done anything wrong. I don't hate any of his movies. In fact, I haven't even paid attention. But I just don't know if the direction to take all of these properties and give it to somebody who has a specialty is a smart choice. Gunn is a specialist when it comes to making good movies and being able to kind of change the direction and so on and so forth. I think giving him the movies, you can argue how you want it, but he's proven and has results to that.
Exactly.
But with gaming and direction of gaming, I don't know if he has any pedigree towards that. So that's where I'm a little adamant with saying I'm not really a big fan of that, move by Warner Brothers as a whole. But I'm still like, well, since he's already there, let's see what happens. And I think the direction of Warner Bros. Montreal probably needs to be a place where they just say, are you guys going to be a supporting studio, or are you guys going to be working on your game? And what scope of game are you guys going to be working on from now henceforth? Because Ubisoft does something very similar. They have a lot of big studios and a lot of small studios. And a lot of those small studios, they support the big studios. So Ubisoft can punch out an Assassin's Creed game every, 3-4 years because they have a bunch of studios that are working on these projects. Right? They can punch out DLC. They can punch out games even in the middle of a pandemic. I don't know if you know, Ubisoft dropped 3 games in 2020.
Yep.
That's wild. I mean, studios were delaying games, and Ubisoft were like, here's 3. It's like, yo, where in the world, are you going to get that? But Ubisoft has such a strong pipeline. They have a lot of devs, a lot of studios. And I think if Warner Brothers Montreal can actually be that supporting studio, you're going to really see them shine. And then they work on small projects while they're at it. I think that to me, that's probably perfect. And as they're working on small projects, they're able to hit gold with, say, one of their small projects, because I think Gotham Knights is in a sense, somewhat of a small-ish, medium-sized project, I guess. Let me put it that way. And that would probably, it would have been better if they had reduced the scope of the game. Like, pick one superhero. This game would have probably thrived if it was like a Robin game or a Batgirl game. And then just shorten it 15 hours, like a Ratchet and Clank, but Batgirl, if you get what I mean. Yeah, and it's like, perfect. Oh, wow, that's nice. 10 hours, 15 hours. And then they keep doing some other projects and so on and so forth. But, that's just my opinion. And I guess we'll see how Wonder Woman plays out. Everything is still up in the air. I don't know exactly how Monolith is going to go ahead and field that, and so on and so forth. But your thoughts on, where you see DC games going in regard to post Wonder Woman, because Wonder Woman is the next DC hero game that's coming out. So after that DC game comes out, we thought we were getting an Injustice 3, but it's MK1. No problem. It feels like an Injustice game, to be honest. I was like, you sure this is supposed to be an MK? Does. Yeah. I'm glad I'm not the only one who thinks that. And a lot of Mortal Kombat fans. It
very much does.
Okay, good. So I'm not crazy. It seemed like they were making an Injustice game, and then they were like, nope, slap some Johnny Cage skins and Liu Kang skins on that bad boy, because MK was just so profitable last cycle. And so they probably decided to go that direction. But what are your thoughts? Post Wonder Woman, what do you think we're going to see in the DC video game fandom?
So, like you, I do have some skepticism. I trust James Gunn undoubtedly with the movie and show direction. I think he's even said it, like, he'll put people in positions that would know better than him how to make things work. I think that with him wanting to make I was concerned when he said he wanted to make everything connected, including the games, and have the same voice actors from the movies be the voice actors in the games.
Mm-hmm.
What eased my mind was when he also said there will be Elseworlds movies and there will be Elseworld games. So we can still get Gotham Knights type games or Arkham type games that have nothing to do with the main landscape DCU universe. And you can bring in actual voice actors to voice act for them. So I do believe that there's room to get that quality DC experience that we've been grown accustomed to with the games. The only thing that makes it difficult is without knowing how the quality of, let's say, the DC universe connected stuff is going to be, how often can we expect that regular game quality that will be under Elseworlds? You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So with that going, it really just comes up to how many canon games are you going to release and how many Elseworld games are you going to release and what the quality looks like for the DCU games, because I'm not concerned about the Elseworld ones. We've got nothing but Elseworld ones our entire lives since they've been making them. So
Mm-hmm.
we're 100%. We know what we're getting with that. What is the DC Universe ones going to look like, and how are they going to perform? I can tell you that if Batman is cast as Jensen Ackles, we're going to be in good hands because
Mm-hmm.
he's already the Batman for the animated movies. He has already done an exceptional amount of voice acting work. So we know he will translate over to voice acting 100% fine. But from a development standpoint, I think that it's going to be quite possibly bigger because movies only got budget for so much.
Mm.
So I think that the games are actually going to get the bigger and wilder storylines than the movies because it's cheaper to do them there. Um, you're gonna have much longer time with it. You're gonna have bigger set pieces. You're gonna have bigger, things at stake, and then the movies can casually mention the events of what took place in the games. Not to mention, these games don't have to necessarily take place chronological order. Some of them could be flashbacks. So if we're
Mm.
getting a Superman game, we know that the new Superman movie is not an origin story. He's already been Superman for a few years. We could get a game on what his first few years of Superman look like.
Hmm.
They can do so much with what they're doing. So it literally depends on execution at this point. Um, Game development is game development, so we know that at the least the game can succeed or fail on having a fun gameplay loop. The only thing at stake is the narrative and the quality of the voice acting for me and the quantity of how many mainline games and Elseworld games we get. And that's why it's kind of difficult to answer. But let's say all things click and things turn out to go swimmingly. I think we're going to be looking at a great thing because it'd be no different than Star Wars. The only difference is Star Wars doesn't have Elseworld games that they create now. Everything is canon.
Mm.
Unless they decanonized it like the Force Unleashed, which is now an Elseworlds game, but before it was canon. So that's going to be unique to them that they're going to continue to make things that have nothing to do with what they're doing with the DCU. And so it's kind of hard to answer, but I do believe we're going to see some good projects. I believe we're going to see some not good ones, but things like Wonder Woman, for example, which will be considered the Elseworlds now, you're going to see those.
Hmm.
And knowing that Monolith is behind that studio and they're behind these one of the developers that's making games for this company. If the narrative sucks, if Monolith is making it, I have a pretty good bet that that gameplay is going to be good though.
I'm
So
here for gameplay,
I,
man.
yes, that's all we're here for. I think honestly speaking, my gameplay should be the biggest portion of any score for a video game. You're not there to
Amen.
watch it.
Amen to that.
You are there to play it. And that is the most important thing. Just like when you're watching a movie, performances and story is more important. But when you come over to video games, do you prefer to watch a video game or do you prefer to play a video game? A
I
video
prefer to
game
play
is
it.
meant to be exactly. It's meant to be interactive. In fact, that's what gameplay is that's the difference between, let's say, arcade and sim. How much is the player interacting with the game. That is an arcade experience because the inputs matter. So I just think that it's going to come down to execution. But nonetheless, we're going to, at the least with Monolith, I even think to a certain Rocksteady, we are going to enjoy the gameplay narrative. Even with NetherRealm, I don't
Mm-hmm.
think by any means they're going to stop making Injustice games.
Oh no.
Just because of this new DCU mandate, they're going to be Elseworlds games,
Mm-hmm.
and they are going to be fun because they have never let us down before. So, I, if you're scared of the narrative, for anybody out there, if you're scared of where it can go narrative, I'm with you. I'm a little scared myself, but always remember the most important part of that entire process, we are 9 times out of 10 in good hands. I even say that as a Gotham Knights person that enjoyed Gotham Knights. I love playing Gotham Knights. I enjoyed the story, but I enjoy playing Gotham Knights. And I thank VG for doing God's work here, what he does on his channel, because he goes into depth about like how much people didn't take the time to understand the combat there. And so we're in good hands. That's what I see with DC's future is that, hey, the narrative is uncertain. The performances of the voice acting is uncertain, but I think we're okay when it comes to gameplay. And personally, that's all that matters.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I agree. I think you're spot on. That's not to say that game, the narrative and the other things aren't, because when you mention NetherRealms, I'm like, yeah, they're the one studio that puts a whole story on a fighting game when almost no one else is doing it. I mean, I'm talking with voice actors, with scenes,
Yep.
with lore, with they incorporate and integrate it into their whole lore and everything, and it's so interesting. You may not necessarily think about it as really interesting, but in a Mortal Kombat game, it kind of irks you if you don't go play the story. In other games, I haven't the story in Street Fighter. I haven't touched it. Maybe I played only one character, and that was it. I don't care. Like, I go in there to go fight. But in Mortal Kombat, you're like, you know what? I wonder what happened. What happened? Like, who's the good guy? Who are the bad guys? Who's the good team? Who are the guys in the gray area? You kind of have to know. And then they throw new characters in there. And you're like, what's this character about? And the story gives
Mm-hmm.
you all of that. And they've done it so well. Even people from the other fighting game communities, would say, well, Mortal Kombat does this. This is why the game sells a lot to casuals. And I'm like, well, demand it or request it from your own, favorite video game, your fighting game developer. I'm sure they can do it. I mean, they're very good at what they do. But, NRS wants to take the time and, add to the budget to do that. And it pays off every given time, because Ed Boon at heart is an entertainer. And a creative.
Yes.
So he's got to see his vision show up the way that he's always dreamt it. And so I think that's what comes out. I think that's what really shines with all of that. So I'm glad you actually put that perspective out there. I guess, I've just become almost too cynical for myself because of what I have to deal with here on the internet. It's not easy. It's hard to see a lot of positives because, all day, and all night you're fighting all these forces, and everyone is, all over the place and things are just scattered. But I'm looking forward to that Wonder Woman game. I mean, I really would love to invest in that. And I know we're skipping past, Suicide Squad killed the Justice League, but it's going to be rough. But I'm still playing that game. I'm going to be here for it.
Much agreed.
But
Same.
that's going to be a whole different conversation because the direction that they went is kind of jarring. But I think there might be a way to soften the blow for that game's announcement that nobody has said yet. They might announce an Arkham Knight remake, remaster that might just smooth out the reception of the Suicide Squad game. I think that's the lifeline. Like, even if they remaster the game, like, go in there, touch up assets, change lighting, improve sound, audio, give it to a team and just kind of, slap them with a budget and say, hey guys, 24 months. How about that? They say, sure. and they go back. You know what I mean? That is going to go
Yeah.
over well. And they make a version that you can maybe stream on some of the cloud services, because that's where it first leaked, NVIDIA, right? Remember you heard about that?
Yep.
When NVIDIA, so
Yep.
yeah, just offer something like that. And I think that's probably going to go over well a little bit with fans. And then now you can get your live service game out there, because live services, you know, people who are making fun, who are those people making fun of Suicide Squad's live service? Their PlayStation is about to go 65% live service in terms of their game development budget. Where are they now? I mean, they were laughing at Suicide Squad back then, right? They were like, oh, Spider-Man
They're
is
laughing.
the
Look
best
where you're at
game.
now.
Now they're like, oh, I'm so worried. I'm so concerned because, you know, Sony is changing. I'm like, everyone's changing. Everyone's moving to where the money is, but they're not abandoning where there already is established cash flow. That's the thing a lot of people don't necessarily realize. They're not making a full-blown pivot. They're just adding, I mean, sure, the Warner Brothers guy, the guy in charge of Warner Brothers Games Interactive, he wants to make a hard pivot, but he can't because there's a solid base that's, you know, here for the single-player games. But if you notice, he's made a very significant pivot overall. I mean, which single-player, you know, DC game, like, do we have? Core DC game do we have left? That doesn't have anything else.
Wonder Woman will probably be the...
It's probably Wonder Woman alone. He's somehow sneakishly over the past few years kind of tweaked everything out where it carries some kind of that games as a service model attached to it. But I think he's learned a lesson. I hope he learned a lesson with how the reception of Gotham Knights was, that there are just some things that you probably don't want to touch. And I don't know how Suicide Squad is going to teach that lesson, but we'll see. It's going to be interesting.
I think also that with Suicide Squad, my selling point personally is the point I just made is actually the opposite. I'm excited for the narrative, and I'm just gonna get through the gameplay.
Oh yeah,
and as best as I can. So it's the direct opposite.
Unless that gameplay is receiving some additions to it, I wouldn't say overhaul. Overhaul is too drastic. It means you know you got to change. You
got to redo the whole game.
You got to redo huge chunks of your game, unless it's got some aspects to it that like, let me give you an example. How do I put this? Okay, say you're playing the game, right? And you're playing as a Suicide Squad members. And let's say Harley and the team, they get separated and Harley is like going through a building and then she runs into Penguin's thugs. Then you put her in a situation where she fights, a single player situation, by the way.
Yep.
Where she gets to fight free flow. Maybe that's
while
like
the other players. Yeah.
While they're not there. That's a single player experience. And you put chunks of that into, you mix it up in the game. You kind of like, you kind of stir it all up and, you put it as a new packaging. That might have been a better way to kind of like even things out, where you can have everybody win in that regard. But Gotham Knights,
I always thought that they were going to do that.
I thought they were.
going to do that with as an Easter egg. Like I thought it was going to be limited to one scene, and like whether they have you briefly control Batman or briefly control Harley under that circumstances. I thought they were going to have that as like an Easter egg. Like, look, you can go back and do it for this one instance in this game, and then the rest of the game you're back to how it wants you to play. But that's very. I never thought about it that way. To integrated every so often into the game. That is actually, I would love that.
If they would do that, if they say maybe this 1 year that they've been there, they integrate those systems in, say, specific chapters, because they have it as a chapter system now. So meaning their chapter system is, the way Unreal Engine kind of works is based on, say, loading a specific map or a specific, huge level with sub-levels in that level. Then they can now add those as levels that you can, find yourself in a specific situation or a scenario, or they make it where it's like you said, Easter eggs all over the place where you're looking for these encounters. Like, now you got to explore, but it's something that would have needed a lot of forethought to add. But can they add it in 1 year? I think they can add a few in 1 year, but the whole direction of the game is designed to, no, we're going to add more characters that you're going to go shoot a lot of brainless bad guys over time and all of that. So that game direction probably needs to be modified. So a new messaging will need to be done, new marketing, all of that stuff will all need to be, put in place to be able to go ahead and like sell the game to the audience that's going to put money for it. Because that's the thing. The audience that's going to put money for the games is who you have to cater to. And if you're looking for a new audience, you're probably better off maybe making something that would appeal to them, and use something separate. This reuse of already established IPs to do live service is just these companies being afraid. Like, we don't want to put something new. We want to slap The Last of Us to factions so Last of Us fans can provide a sure player base. Like, oh, we want to get it's what's called an income floor.
Yep.
Oh, we know for sure Last of Us players are going to at least buy this game so we can break even. But at the end of the day, how about the long term of what it is you say you want? You're trying to make a games as a service, right? Well, make a good games as a service that's going to appeal to the audience, that's going to stay long term and fulfill the goals. And that's going to mean that you don't jar the already existing audience, use them to, use that audience to basically become your income floor by just giving them what they already want, single player games. Sony does a good job at this. They'll take all that live service money and go make single player games and sell consoles so that you can have more people playing live service games on PlayStation to make them more money, to make more single player games, to then sell more consoles. They're just basically, it's a cycle, and they're doing it so well. I've been saying this for a long time. I was like, why are people not seeing that all these live service games are paid for by the games as a service? And people were looking at me like, no, Sony invests in its... I'm like, where are they getting the money to make these games from? People are like, oh, they make a lot of money. They have a lot. I'm like, they're getting it from Call of Duty. I said it before we even saw the FTC case. I'm like, wait, hold on. Call of Duty is selling how many $1 billion? Oh my gosh. PlayStation is basically taking a chunk of that money and reinvesting it into their single player games, because I'm like, these single player games are getting more and more expensive to make. How can they justify this stuff to their, to their shareholders? And I was like, wait, there's a cash cow every year. Actually, two. It's called FIFA and Call of Duty. And they're just giving this free 30%, almost free, but no effort 30%. That's what it is. What does Sony have to do? Just make PlayStation Plus and create a page and have the file available to download and have updates to deploy. Okay, they've been doing this forever, so it's built into their business plan. So the more Call of Duty grows, the more their platform grows, the more this 30% starts to get, if Call of Duty this year sells 1 billion, they see a good chunk of that. If Call of Duty sells 10 billion, well, it's the same amount. It's literally this. It's the same amount of work for more money. They just take that and go make The Last of Us 6, and they pay all these Hollywood stars and they pay big music studios so that they can tickle your ears, and you're like, oh, this is the best game ever. God of War soundtrack is better than basically everything they're publishing in Hollywood. Like, dude, how does a video game have a better soundtrack than, in many cases anyways, than movies? Well, that's because Sony is throwing the money in there, man. Sony wants that to happen. So at the end of the day, I think it's just something where, we're going to have to just come to terms with what our options are. And if Sony continues to put that single player model as a viable option, no publisher is going to abandon it. So as much as I'm mad at Sony, I think them continuing to use the single player games as a driving force for their ecosystem, because that is their number one driving force. They have no live service games that draw anybody. None. It's only the single player titles. But those single player titles continue to put they continue to put a strain on the industry. Does that make sense? In a positive way, saying single player games are viable. So no one's going to abandon single player and then go to, multiplayer fully. Like the Warner Brothers exec that's trying to move to more games as a service, he has to temper his expectations down because he's seeing that there's that viability. And with Baldur's Gate just coming out too, and having a strong single player aspect with RPGs and all that, it will continue to reinforce this, and we're all going to win at the end of the day. I think there's just a lot of fear in the industry, but that's not really how it works. When the market wants something, the market's going to get what it's going to get. If you don't give the market what it wants, the market's they're going to ignore you and they're going to go spend money, on somebody who's giving them what they want. So that's actually a very interesting aspect. So I think we've hit that. We've surpassed that 30-minute mark that I promised you, but we built in that aspect to things. But before we wrap up, I wanted to go ahead and kind of like pick your brain just on something that I think is pretty interesting. And that
Go
is the
for it.
conversation of the Steam Deck. You've been a Steam Deck user for a long time. I don't have one yet. I had to sacrifice.
Love it.
It was either the 4090 or the deck. What are your thoughts on the Steam Deck, and how do you see it as a viable middle ground for, say, people who maybe want to come into PC gaming and are probably not ready to make the big pivot? What are your thoughts? What do you see it, or who do you see it serving? Let's look at that from there.
Okay, so that's honestly a unique point because it's more complicated than you like, not complicated, but it's more of a intricate conversation than like maybe one would lead themselves to believe. Because I would say you have a lot of Steam Deck competitors now. There's the
Mm-hmm.
Steam Deck, there's the Aya Neo, there's the Asus ROG, Ally, and
Mm-hmm.
I would say that for those who are accustomed to a console and you're making the switch over, the Steam Deck is the best because it's the way I would compare it is the Steam Deck is to consoles what Elden Ring was to Souls games.
Hmm.
As to where that is the you can get your bearings and learn what you're doing at your own pace without things ever feeling like they're overwhelming. And as you go on, you can master your knowledge of it as you continue to use it. And that is what I would consider the Steam Deck specifically out of all of those, the easiest way. Because it is console formatted. When you turn it on, it is the interface works exactly like a console would. It is very laid out for you, very easy to understand, everything condensing in one place. And if you want a more PC feel, you can switch to desktop mode and that will give you the complete PC experience.
Hmm.
And then you can go from there. As to where you go to those other ones, you're completely shot into that. But I believe that making the jump from, like, say, a Steam Deck, it'll be a lot easier on a person than even going to a laptop, for example,
Hmm.
because that console experience is still there while you're playing around with these different launchers, getting to get used to having different launchers. If a game doesn't have Steam, if it's not available on Steam, then you can go to the desktop mode, download that launcher. You're gonna probably have to watch some YouTube tutorials if you're not aware.
Mm-hmm.
But once you watch it once, you won't forget it because it's not that complicated. I honestly think that the Steam Deck is a beautiful transition to PC gaming because people will start to learn how to fiddle with settings. Even downloading something like the different Protons and then the Proton GEs, like downloading them will enable, say, like if a game is not able to run on the Steam Deck on its own, having those Proton patches or being able to download them will allow those games to run smoothly or smoother. That way you can actually play them without having to wait for an additional Steam um, patch itself. And so that will legitimately give you all the fundamentals of how to handle a PC. Not to mention, when you do make that jump, all of your games that you have bought, especially if you play on Steam, all of the games that you have played, your data will carry over. When you leave Steam, your data is dependent on the game and the launcher you're using. But if it's from Steam, 9 times out of 10, your gameplay is carried over through that cloud.
Hmm.
But when it comes to the games the person purchases, no matter what launcher they purchased on, all you have to do is log into your account, and those games are there. You don't have to rebuy them. It's just a way for you to play on the go. And honestly, like it is the best thing. Honestly, there, I use my Steam Deck almost every day to this day because it allows me to play on the go. It allows me to play. If I don't feel like turning on my PC and melting myself during the summer, there's my Steam Deck. So it is very convenient, but also very entry level friendly. And that's why I would say like it is the Steam Deck specifically is to gaming with Elden Ring was the Souls games. I definitely think that it is a smooth transition and players will feel right at home the moment they boot it up because it's no different than how they're used to dealing with the interface on the console.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I appreciate you actually taking the time to break that down, because you know I'm an advocate for having people start exploring other hardware options and platforms where they game. I usually say, get a PC. Like I said, I chose to get a 4090 compared to getting, say, I could have gotten a 3090 and a Steam Deck, but I said, nope, I'm just going to go straight for the 4090. And then if the Steam Deck ever becomes, something that I want to invest in, I'll be happy to do that. And I'm happy the ROG Ally actually came out because that kind of got me to also
Yes.
pause again. Because, again, I want to see what I like the hardware that can give me the
The
biggest
most
boom.
performance.
Like, yeah, I want
Mm-hmm.
explosive because I'm somewhat of a mild enthusiast. I'm not like okay, I'm going crazy. No, 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 no. But I do like to have, if I'm going to buy hardware, I want the hardware to be able to kind of like to slap as much as possible. So now I'm
Oh,
happy that,
I want the most powerful on the market.
so that's pretty, yeah, that's exactly what it is. So seeing that, okay, the ROG Ally is coming in as a competitor, and they knew
Yep.
that the competitive edge would be to just provide more power. I'm looking at it and I'm trying to say, okay, what will be the advantages and what will be the disadvantages? The Steam Deck already has the ability for you to be able to use an SD card. I don't know if the ROG Ally allows for you to be able to use one. So these are some things that you may have to kind of go in and, figure out and factor into the conversation. But I'm glad you actually provided that, insight and perspective. So on that note, we're going to go ahead and just wrap this conversation up for now. And I just wanted to say thank you so much, Sway, for actually jumping in and, doing this, collaboration and
Thank
letting
you
us
for
pick your
having me.
brain. It is our pleasure, man. And for those of you who may be wondering, like, at the beginning of this podcast, we said, Sway is on Twitter. I recommend that you actually follow him on Twitter. You can stay up to date right here on the screen. You will see his Twitter profile. I have it here for you guys to be able to take a look at so that you know exactly, what he's all about. And just the fact that, he's a very huge contributor in the superhero game space really, really does add a lot of value to, our conversations here. So thanks so much, Sway, for jumping into the conversation. Thank you very much for being willing to, do this. And I really do appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm glad to do it. Can't wait to do it again.
Awesome. We'll be having you soon, hopefully very soon, and it's not going to take too long. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for watching. Let me hear your thoughts about whatever catches your insights in the comment section, and peace out.